Welcome everyone to Let Them Talk. My name is Yuri Bobbert, your host of this podcast. In this podcast, I have the privilege of talking to extraordinary leaders around the world. Together with my guest, I dive into captivating stories, capture some wisdom, and navigate challenges to tomorrow. Join me today as we welcome our first guest, Marloes Halkes.
Of course. I'm currently head of capabilities and performance in Philips for the IT organization. And I work as an executive coach. You mentioned that I have done the INSEAD executive coach education, both for individual coaching as for team coaching. And what got me there, I studied physics and chemistry, very rational study. And started my career and worked for different companies, worked for Shell, worked for TNT, BHP Billiton, that brought me to Australia, ProRail and now obviously Philips. And if you look at my career, I sort of first was very rational and okay, we have to do this, we need to move from A to B, what are all the boxes that need to be ticked and go there. But during my career, I started to see, okay, there's a lot more at play to get to where you want people to go. And that is sort of how I came to be into this position. And there's a lot of steps in between it, but I'm sure we're going to discuss that.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you are a lean black belt. Well, what is a black belt, and is there also a green belt or a dan, as we know in judo?
Interesting question. Yes, there is a yellow belt, there's a green belt, there's a black belt, and I have the master black belt. I don't actually know if there's a dan or anything on top of that. I'm sure there is, but I've never had a chance to go more. So what is lean? Yeah, a lot of people say, oh, it's a hype, etc. And maybe it's educated in many different ways. For me, lean is a philosophy that looks at how can leaders work in such a way and organize their company in such a way that the primary process of a company is fully supported. And that takes a lot because typically organizations are structured in the sense that the leader knows what to do, cascades that down, and the people on the work floor execute. If the leader thinks this company needs to go a different way or we need to change direction, the leader has all the knowledge, dictates how it's going to go, tells his work floor, and then magically the ship's going to turn a little bit. Lean turns that around and says the people that are closest to the work floor, they know what needs to be done to become more efficient, to have lower cost, to go at greater speed, etc. And I need to find a way of how that message comes up to the leader, who can then say, okay, I will facilitate this, or I will organize things different so that the work can be done easier. In that, you have the yellow belt, the green belt, etc. They are stages of education and of proof that you need to deliver, that you have applied this knowledge in a company. And maybe it's interesting to make that analogy with, I think you referred to the dan, to the fighting sport, to say, okay, the higher you go into these colors, the more you understand it's about the philosophy. So when you ask a lot of people what is lean, they will come with tools, they will come with mandatory steps to take, mandatory ceremonies to have, a bit like agile in a way. Like if you have a scrum ceremony, then you're really working agile. But the higher you go into that education, the more you understand it's all about the philosophy, and a whole lot of tools are there to support that philosophy. Hope that sort of answers your question.
Yeah, it's really, I think I need to recall me to a little bit to like the 10,000 hours you need to make at some point where you really get into flight mode and where you really can have people do their thing and you can guide them because they are working, they know what to do, but they're more being guided by somebody that has the experience at the 10,000 hours there. And Hey, so that was also the main reason why I find it very interesting to have you on our show. Is that because over time, today I've looked it up and we know exactly each other for 31 years.
Oi, that sounds so old. Yeah, but I believe it. It's
but
true.
The interesting thing is that when you came back from Australia, you joined Philips, like a large corporation, large organization that acts globally, both in the US as well in North America, as Asia and Europe. A global organization that with formal structured organization, other things become, let's say, more relevant to practice. So in the case of, for example, we talked a lot about you being the coach for a lot of CISOs, Chief Security Officers. You do that quite often. You coach them in their careers, specifically in those large organizations, where they cannot simply rely on the direct monitor and control. So they direct some things, everybody's going to do it, and then they will do it. It's more like a functional leadership role that they have.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you have done quite some research also in your NCL time into the changes in that role and how that functional steering influences the role of the CISO. I'm referring to this, Marloes, because that was the main reason why I'm asking you, is that there was a study recently that the turnover of CISOs is 2 years. So the main root cause for that they have such a high turnover is stress. Because they apparently they face a lot of stress. And I was curious how you have observed that in your coaching path with them.
Yeah, that's wow, 2 years. That's fast. So if I look at working with CISOs, but also with other technical influenced roles, then let me stick to the CISOs first. So I see quite a few things. One is there's a certain assumption of what the role of a CISO should be. CISO should be strict, a CISO should dictate, a CISO should know everything. And if you think at all these capabilities that people assume a CISO should have, then it's already quite stressful, because not only do you need to know it today, you also need to know it tomorrow and the day after. And well, you know better than I that the field develops so quickly that you have a lot of demand on your plate to keep on top of all the information that you need to have to be a CISO. That is one thing. Then the other thing that I see is that the role of a CISO is within an organization, right? And that organization typically exists out of people who want to sell, who want to grow the business, who want to make the business go faster, beat competition, etc. So you're placed in a company, and 99 out of 100 people in that company have an objective that is probably the same objective as yours, but they're much more action focused. Bam, 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 we need to go and fast and go. And as the role of a CISO is sometimes to pause and reflect and to say, is this the right thing? Now, if you're the only person in that room of maybe 15 other people that has that message, it becomes you being an outlier in the group. And in any groups in which you're the outlier, you will feel stress. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot survive as a CISO, but you need to be aware of the fact that, one, this is taking place, and two, how are you responding to that? Are you going to run faster? Are you going to make compromises? Are you becoming stricter? How are you adapting to that? And is that a helpful adaptation or adaptation, or is it not so helpful? So that is one of the things that I observe in that. So it's who am I as a person, but also what is the role of a CISO? What do I think is the role, and what does the company think is that role?
Yeah, so basically also so as a CISO you need to obviously have all those technical capabilities and understanding of the profession, but also then a good insight in your own emotions and your own reflection, your self-reflection on how you're going to behave to get things done.
Yeah, and this is interesting that you mention the emotions, because maybe it's different for very new generation, but I think in our generation we are taught that being professional is not to have too many emotions and certainly not be guided by your emotions. If you're professional, you stay cool. Whether you feel angry, you know how to suppress that. Whether you feel sad, scared, whatever, you know how to suppress that and be a tough man or woman. Typically a man. Most of the CISOs I work, unfortunately, are still male. Yeah. So if you look at that, you have all those emotions because you're a person. You're not a robot, and we're taught to not have those emotions. So that already is again causing stress, because you notice something in yourself that shouldn't be there according to your assumption of what the role should be. And then two, we forgot to learn that these emotions are data, they're information. Not to say that you always should act on your emotion, because that would maybe also be a bit crazy in the boardroom. But if you're feeling lonely, frustrated, scared, or a decision is being taken and maybe rationally you agree with the decision, but you have this gut feel that, no, it's not okay, it's important to listen to that. Not to say, I only listen to that, but to try to understand what is it that makes me feel, because it's information. And that type of information, I think, is often overlooked. And if you overlook that and you don't give it a place, again, that delivers stress. So, yeah.
And how do you train and coach the CISOs that you currently are guiding in becoming the next, they need to work or they want to work towards the next level? How do you guide them and how do you help them?
Yeah. Most of all, I work on awareness. So awareness of who am I as a person, what are my values, and then looking at the role of CISO. What are the values that I believe a CISO should have, and are they the same as my own values? Are they conflicting with my own values? Do I want, like, maybe as a person I want to be friends with everyone, and then I step into the role of CISO and I feel that a CISO should be strict and should say, no, it's not allowed, or always security first, or I don't know, could be different assumptions that you have. And do they match with who you are and what your values are? And then is your assumption of the role, is it correct? Because maybe you've only seen examples of a CISO that acts in a certain way, but maybe there's a way you can execute that role that is in line with your values. And then I also look at what are the organizational values. So is it okay to say, I don't know how to do this? Or are you perceiving that it's not okay? Have you tested that? So we work on awareness and we work on experimenting. So maybe every time you come in the same pattern with your boss, who says you need to do this now because it's important for sales, and you get angry, maybe every time, and try to see, can we respond in a different way? Just experiment with that and reflect on it. And that helps people. So you use the words guide. As a coach, I don't guide people. I don't tell people what to do, because first of all, I don't have the content knowledge. But I help people reflect and become aware and try to experiment with different things than they would normally do.
Yeah, so experiment with several styles of leadership.
Yeah.
And then see how that works out.
Yeah.
What does it do with your own emotion? Does it feel well? Do you feel frustrated? Does it didn't work out at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And we discussed also, I think that was a quite interesting topic. We we are in our profession, we are familiar with what we call the IKEA effect. So a lot of security professionals, risk professionals think they should know everything, they should do everything themselves because they know, some of them are very knowledgeable, so they stick to doing it themselves, like similar with the IKEA, but sometimes also from economical reason or social reasons, it could be better to outsource or to delegate certain tasks, so you don't do it yourself anymore. Is there anything that, in terms of sort of a self-questioning, knowing when should I ask myself the question, am I still good enough in this task that I'm now executing, or is it better that somebody else is doing it? So self-questioning. Is that something that you also see in your observations?
Yes, I do. And again, I see a lot of that coming back to what is my assumption of the role that I have. Is my assumption I need to know everything? Because otherwise, why should I be CISO? Or is my assumption it's okay that I don't know everything as long as I get all the information to me and I get all the right information and the trusted information, and based on that I make a decision. So we work on that to say, okay, is that thing. The other thing is, because if you outsource, do you lose control? Do you lose control, and what does that mean to you? And is it a manageable risk, or is it a risk that is too big to take? And then again, we look at what are the facts and how do you experience it? Because if you've always been successful because you knew everything and you saw other people make mistakes, and you have trouble trusting other people, is that based on reality, or that you can't trust people, or has that become your perception? So we look at that, and then the other thing is that I'm inclined to say that it might be more for the older generation, but I don't know if that's actually true. People with a lot of experience have always been the smartest in the room. Well, not always, but typically they've been the smartest in the room. And constantly they get confirmed that they're the smartest in the room, which makes you start wondering, can I trust anyone else? Because if I'm always the smartest in the room, why would I let someone less smart take a decision? And that is also something we talk about experimenting. How can I experiment with my perception of the fact that the other people in the room are less smart than me? And then a lot of things come to mind, but another thing that I see happening, especially with experienced people, they might have been in the role for a lot of years and they have the assumption that they know better. And if I have the assumption that I know better than you, and I'm already having a little bit of trust issues, and I'm going to ask you to do something for me that I find important, I might go and ask you a lot of double check questions like, Yuri, did you think of this? Yuri, did you think of that? Don't forget to tie your shoes, or whatever. All these instructions that I can give you, that will sort of make you feel a little bit like a child. Because I'm giving you all those instructions, not trusting you, and you might respond by becoming quite insecure. You might respond by becoming like going into puberty, like going like rebellious. And if you do any of that, it will reconfirm to me that you're a child and I can't let you do things. So I become even more of a parent to you, and I'm using the word parent-child. And that's a cycle then. So I'm actually having a self-fulfilling prophecy by not really trusting you, managing that, and therefore getting signals that indeed I cannot trust you. And that's a cycle that you need to break. And that's up to the person in the parent chair in this case, and also of course in the person in the child chair, what we're saying when you're talking about, hey, young people, what is your advice for them? Because sometimes they're being treated as a child, and how do you break through that cycle? Can we look at different behavior, and what does it do to the other person?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is this something where you also experiment with your coaches? So
yeah.
So what kind of role do you have with working with your manager, for example?
Yeah, we do. So, and it's you see me laugh, it's one of my favorite things because ideally in the work situation, we all want to communicate as adults, right? You're an adult, I'm an adult, and we all have different expertise and we work towards the best solution for the organization. But if we have that parent-child communication at play, how are we going to break that cycle? And the experiment is somehow a little bit easier if we're talking to the child player in this scenario, because I talk about how do you enter the room of your boss. Do you already feel a little bit small, a bit insecure, or do you already feel annoyed? Is it like puberty annoyance, like who's telling me what to do? And then try to say, can I experiment with how would an adult enter that room, or even how would a parent enter that room? And then see what the other response is going to be. And yeah, very often we see different responses, and it creates a lot of insights where people say, oh wow, so my boss can also be like this. And that's also typically when we get the feedback from bosses to say, hey, I really notice a difference in the behavior of Yuri if I was working with you, for example.
Yeah, they notice and they also share that then.
Yeah. It's nice.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So there's a name for it, eh? Parentification?
Yeah, it's called parentification. So if I being a parent to you all the time, you become a little bit of a child.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's also recognizable when you see conversations going on between managers within the, let's say, the risk and security domain. So we're here mainly talking now about the role of the CISO, but it's not on purpose that we do that, because it's not all about the CISO. It's also about taking ownership by the CFO and the CEO, people higher up in the organization, taking ownership and giving the good example to others. How do you take ownership? How do you lead? How do you lead? In technology, we talk a lot about craftsmanship, showing that you really understand your profession, like a CFO understands all the financial figures. Like same with the digital officer, should know all the majority of the things that happen in the technology environment. You also examined quite a lot about authentic leadership, in terms of when you are a CEO or a CFO, how does your authenticity change over time? And you already shared a little bit about that if you are perceived being the smartest in the room and you also act like smartest in the room, at some point you believe in yourself that you are the smartest in the room, and you neglect the fact that you need to self-reflect and things like that. How, what do you see basically in your current working environment and also in your coaching environment with people losing their authentic leadership, and how can we be alert on that, or perhaps give feedback to the leader in a constructive way about that they lose their authenticity?
Well, a few thoughts going through my head. First of all, let's first talk a little bit about what is authentic leadership. Because, to me, authentic leadership is that the values of who you are as a person are as much in line with the values of your role in your organization as possible. And you don't suppress too much of your own values to belong into the boardroom or into the organization. Because then already leadership starts to become a little bit weak, I think, because it's not authentic. So maybe to go to that. So what I see, and then you ask, like, how can you stay authentic?
And perhaps also to make the question a little bit more complex. Is you also have thoughts about somebody having a role and adhering to a specific role, and then sometimes stepping out of that role?
So that's interesting, because who is the real leader? And Well, we all know that we just had elections in the Netherlands, and I was listening to the news. I think it was on the weekend, and we all know Geert Wilders is the biggest party at the moment, and people are asking, who is Geert Wilders? Because
also foreign people, a lot of foreign people.
Yeah, who is he? Yeah, who is he?
Yeah.
And for 17 years, I think it's 17 years, Geert Wilders has been in the opposition, and he's been literally quoted, I think in the last few days, to say, but now I'm going to be a prime minister for all people, and now I need to take care of all people. So all these blunt statements, they're going to be milder. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it says something about the fact that he had a role perception when he was in opposition. I need to be against everything, I need to be harsh, I need to make insulting comments, I need to be...
Yeah, he was quite insulting and quite harsh towards specific groups.
Yeah, so apparently that was his perception of what he should be as someone in the opposition. And it's interesting because now he says he's going to be milder, he says he's going to be in line with the law and all of those things. Again, I have no idea whether that is true, but it says something about, hey, this same person was in a role first and now is in a different role, and we see a different side. And people get confused because, hey, before you were saying this and now you're saying this, so who are you? And
is this authentic? I think people really tend to ask themselves the question, is this guy authentic?
Is this real?
Yeah, is this real?
Yeah, is this real? And look, I don't know if it's real. I would be great if I could tell if this is real or not. But it says something about, okay, even if it's real, right? Even if it's real and he now thinks I need to be milder and in line with the law, etc. Even if that's real, so what were you doing then in your previous role? And was that then all fake? Or who are you? And I think if the gap between you as a person and your values as a person and the values that need to go with your role is too big, the people start sensing it. And especially if you then move to a new role or a different company and different roles in there, like, because the world is small and people know you. So that is something that I see a lot. And in my coaching practice, we work on trying to get some clarity on who am I and who am I in that role. And of course, everybody in different roles has different behavior. That it is natural, and it should be, because we can't all be exactly the same person at the couch late at night as we are in a boardroom. But some core values you should be able to keep the same. Otherwise, you're going to be having a difficult job staying real, staying authentic.
So I'm also looking a little bit at, let's say, a large corporate environment, with a certain smell of the place. Professor Goschal, the late Professor Goschal, has a very nice speech about the smell of the place. Determines to quite a high extent how people act in a certain role.
Yeah.
And also the culture determines if decisions are made at the coffee machine in the hall or in the formal meetings that we have.
Yeah.
And I'm from the I'm a little bit older, but I'm also from the generation where a lot of those decisions are actually made at the coffee machine rather than transparent in a meeting room where decisions should be taking place, etc. So that also has a little bit to do, I think, with authenticity, but then more like organizational authenticity.
Yeah.
Do we really live up to our values here of transparency, whistleblowing, open culture, things like that?
Yeah.
Do you observe the same?
Yeah, I do. First of all, big organizations obviously always have their story correct, right? We're open, equal chances, etc. And I believe they always intend that to be true. So I don't believe in some conspiracy that companies are deliberately misleading people with those stories. I believe they want it to be true. But what is the reality? So we have, for example, a role description on paper, CISO always needs to have the final say, for example. But that's on paper. And what does a person experience within the culture? Is the CISO an annoying part of the team that we need to have it, but rather not?
A police officer?
A police officer. Is the CISO a valued partner? That do other people find it also important what the CISO is bringing to the table?
Yeah, the enabler. Yeah.
All of that is that really the case? So we look at what does the organization implicitly tell you? Is it implicitly telling you, nice that you're here, but we needed a CISO on paper because our shareholders are asking for it? But really the most important decisions are taken indeed at the coffee machine or when you're not in the room. And if that is the case, what are you going to do about it? And then again, the first step is to be aware of it. And this is information that typically you don't see written in an email, but it's information in your gut feeling or your emotions.
Also information that they don't tell you when you're recruited, or
no one is going to tell you.
Yeah.
No one is going to tell you. If you want to hear a little bit about it, you might ask any talent acquisition, why did the first 3 CISOs leave? Because that gives you some information about the role in the organization. Because if there's a high turnover, every 2 years a CISO in a certain company leaves, to me that doesn't say too much about the person anymore, but about the role and how is it positioned in the organization. And you can't always change that, but to become aware of it might help you deal with that in a better way. That is hopefully less stressful and hopefully doesn't lead you to leave the company in 2 years again. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the high turnover, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's an interesting number and not good for companies either.
No, it's both bad for the candidates, for the people, as well as for the company. In the end, I think I'm also interested in your opinion about there's a lot of tech regulation coming at European organizations that will have a significant impact on mid-market companies that don't have sufficient staff or leadership or capabilities in place to really work with that and digest all those requirements that those legislation will have. What's your opinion to companies in that mid-market segment when you're looking at leadership like CEOs, CFOs? On the one hand, you need to adhere to it, but on the other hand, you don't have sufficient capabilities to do that. What would be your suggestion or your idea about that?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not the technical expert on that, but my first suggestion would be is to try to find knowledge about that, to say, who do I trust? Maybe not in my own company, but in a different company. Are there any consultants that can give me that advice? And to open up for that instead of wait till the very last moment to keep being able to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. So tap into, let's say, an outside-in view of externals that have the knowledge for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I can also imagine that small companies don't always have the resources, be it money, time, or people, to listen to that external advice.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I hear also another thing, and I'm also interested in your opinion, is that these, let's say, CFOs and CEOs nowadays, for let's say the newer generation CEOs, are really interested to learn what do I need to do in terms of. Previously, we learned how you do finance, how you do your marketing, your logistics, etc. And then now they want to know more about how to adhere to regulatory requirements when it comes to technology. But most of the time, they always refer to, and I also get that question quite often, is how do I get somebody that speaks normal language without abbreviations and a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
We can simply don't understand these people. That's what I hear quite often.
Yeah, that's again interesting.
Sounds familiar?
Yeah, it sounds familiar. So the study that I did way back, so when I was 18 years old, was actually started. It's called Science and Policy, and it was started because a lot of technical problems at the time, research problems, required both people with a physics background and a chemistry background to work together. But they spoke, and maybe still do, I don't know, I'm not in that field anymore, but they spoke completely different languages. So if Shell, for example, was doing any research, and they wanted the opinion of the people with the physics background and the people with the chemistry background, it was impossible to merge that. So it started already, like, how can you get those people to talk to each other? And then I also laugh a little bit because, you know that I work in IT. I also worked in IT before I was in Philips. And what I see is that the most clever people don't always get hurt. Why not? Because they haven't learned how to translate into language that, in this case, me or other people in the company understand. And that's very sad to see, because then you don't get the best knowledge. You can't use it in your company because you don't understand the language. And to me, that is twofold, because one, of course, the technical background people have, they must learn how to communicate better. But secondly, and that is where I see very little effort, is that leaders need to learn how to help these people explain to them. So it's very easy to say, I don't understand this, what's next? But try to ask questions and probe so that you learn how to listen to these people. And that is an art that, not everybody takes the time for or understands. And especially I see a problem with people that have been on the top for a very long time, because they never had to do this because they knew it all. And that's a skill. How do you listen to people? I call it work floor, but that's also for technological schooled people. Yeah. How do you listen to their knowledge?
Yeah. And the fact to, let's say, utilize the brain capacity of the group. I'm thinking of Baba Shiv. He's a neuroscientist of Stanford University. He is also on our show
cool.
next year. He talked about, if you have a meeting, he said about utilizing the brain of the group in a meeting, is to, if you have a meeting of an hour, recognize that in the last hour, so in the final minutes of the hour, the best ideas will be generated and the best conversations will start. So make sure that as facilitator of the group, that you get that moment more earlier in the meeting, let's say 45 minutes or perhaps 30 minutes before ending. So I think that's also how we can, as manager, facilitate meetings in a better way to get the best brain capacity.
That's interesting. I do want to learn more about that, so I will listen to that conversation as well. It also puts a link, because typically in the last 2 minutes of any coaching session is when the most interesting things happen. So exactly. It's interesting. I'm interested to learn about this. And yes, I recognize. I also facilitate group meetings, strategy meetings, and yes, I see that if a meeting takes 90 minutes. Maybe the first 80 minutes people are talking, and always the same people are talking a lot.
Exactly, yeah.
And maybe at the very last minute, when push comes to shove, maybe the more introverted people, or the more introverted people might talk, because it's really important that they are being heard. So, one of the things that you can do is, of course, a simple technique. You can ask everyone to write down their answer to a certain question first.
Yeah.
And then you pick up the notes and read it out, because that takes a lot of the airtime away from people who like to talk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that he also mentioned was at the end of the meeting, the free-flowing process is at full speed, and everybody's comfortable discussing, talking, and so the flow is better than in the beginning. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time, depending on the facilitator. But I find it interesting that you also mentioned that in terms of that you want to tap into also the introverted people because they are most of the time, or sometimes also very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And then you tap into the most knowledgeable.
Sometimes
people
more knowledgeable than the extroverted people. And that requires either a good facilitator, but ideally a good leader who's aware of this and can say, hey, I haven't heard you speak yet, or find any ways to give everyone as much airtime. Yeah, that's still something I think every organization can still work on.
Yeah. Hey, I hear a lot of very interesting insights. I think both for CEOs, CFOs, people in leadership positions, but also specifically for people working in digital security and risk management, that are definitely also in a very good position nowadays because of a lot of legislation that is coming at us. So the stress, the positive stress towards them in terms of performing and doing well is quite high because there's a lot of expected from them. I found a very interesting quote from somebody quoting you.
Okay.
From back in the days.
Okay, I'm curious.
And she said, Marloes is very result oriented. She's a fixer and somebody that always finishes things. Action speaks louder than words. That's her let's say mantra. Is that actually true? Is she talking the truth, or?
It's obviously one person's vision, but I recognize that. Yeah, I recognize that, and results-oriented in the sense that what is the objective that we're here to come for, and what contributes to that objective.
Because I'm asking this because it contradicts a little bit on what you just mentioned about giving people room and so where you're perhaps less focused on the result, or how do you do that then? So allowing people to talk and to have enough input, but on the other hand also achieve goals and getting things done.
Yeah, this is really a nice bridge because I think I know who said this, and it is a while back in my career.
We can do a quiz about it and see if you're right.
Let's do that after we put the microphones off. So, at the start of my career, I was convinced that seeing the right action, doing the right action, go do it, was the way to go. And then you still, at the start of your career, you have a small circle of influence, a small circle that you need to influence. So that is still okay. Then going to larger groups, it's okay, how am I going to influence a larger group? And I started to use the lean mindset, the lean philosophy, applying the tools first. Do daily management, do Hoshin, it doesn't matter, they're just tools that we use in lean, in agile. We have the scrum meetings. You apply those and get things done, and it worked. But then going even higher up in organizations, you come to the culture and the behavior of people. And then you want to change that a little bit, because if people still don't want to hear problems, you can use tools that bring problems to the leaders. But then, if you don't want to hear them, you're not going to hear them. So I think I myself have made a transition that to achieve the objective, I need to listen. And to achieve the objective, I need to create space. Because if I, as a leader, I'm also working as a leader, I don't only coach, but as a leader, I need to do that, because if I am on top of things and being managing actions of others, people are just going to wait and sit for me to give them the recipe on how to achieve things. And one, I don't have the time to do that. And two, the world changes so fast. So if my recipe doesn't work anymore, I don't want people to look at me and say, so give me a new recipe. I want them to find out themselves. And for that, I need to create awareness of what recipe are you applying? What are you learning about that recipe? How do you need to experiment to get different results? And so it is maybe contradictory. In my head, it's the same. Listening to get results.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So the quote was from a while back, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you also changed and learned yourself. So that's good to
Yeah.
hear that. Also the master black belt learns herself.
Exactly.
And continuously learns.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. That is my my goal at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're always searching for, let's say, improvements. Eh? So we most of the time we're here, we try to improve things. We want to learn from others. We want to continuously improve ourselves. You also mentioned something about a previous generation being very tough and very oriented and focused on, I need to be tough and I need to be indeed the smartest in the room. Eh? You already mentioned that.
Yeah.
But is it being tough all the time for yourself, not wearing people out? Like,
well, yeah. So a lot of the leaders that I work with are quite high in organizations. So they're the type of leaders that have very strong ambition, and sometimes that ambition comes from having tough experience in childhood or in upbringing. And having learned that the world is tough, and to achieve things, you need to be tough on yourself and tough on others.
And tough to others, yeah.
Yeah, because if you're not, then you might be perceived as weak, or you overlook things, or again, we come to the trust issue. Maybe you can't trust others. That being tough is often a perception of the role. I need to be tough. But it very often stems from, I'm not so nice to myself. So I call it self-empathy. So if I don't have a lot of empathy for myself, and I want people around me to learn, to experiment, to make mistakes, fail fast, and then win the next time, share their uncertainties, the I don't know how to do this, I need to be kind to people, because if I'm tough to people, it's a lot scarier to come and say, dear leader, I don't know how to do this, or I think I made a mistake. Can you help me correct it before the mistake becomes even better? But to be kind to others, you need to be able to be a little bit kind to yourself as well, because you can't be very tough on yourself and kind. I mean, I'm sure some people can, but it's difficult, because if you're having high standards for yourself and being tough, you're typically also going to radiate that to others. And I work with some leaders, and of course leaders never come to me to say, can you help me to be kinder to myself, because that's perceived as weak. But in longer coaching relationships, we sometimes end up in, hey, how forgiving are you to yourself? And if you're not forgiving to yourself about your own mistakes, maybe that makes you additionally anxious to make mistakes, and you don't want to give others the control of doing things that are in your scope. If you're very anxious to make those mistakes, you're going to also put that on others. And can we experiment with that? Can we experiment that maybe you forgive yourself on a certain mistake, and you can forgive others for certain mistakes, and what does that do? So we see that as well.
Yeah. There's another, and we're almost approaching the end of the broadcast, but I have so many other questions to you, but I have a last remaining question, and that is that you've coached quite a lot of chief security officers in the past.
Yeah.
And what I observe is that there's a switch now for the CISOs in that position that are from a newer, younger generation, but also a lot of female. So with a different background, most are not within IT or technology driven, but females with indeed more empathy for others, and younger generation that look to topics like this in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Do you see? Do you observe the same?
I see that, and in my practice, this is a very prominent topic for the younger generation. Why? Because they look at people that are currently in the CISO role, And they might see strict, dominant, politically savvy, all these sort of traits, and they might look at that. I think younger generations, full stop, are already looking a little more like, who am I and what fits me, rather than how can I fit the bill of that new role. But they look at that and they think, well, if that's the role, that's not me. So either I don't want to do it or I can't do it. And then we talk a lot about the person who's now doing that role. Are there other ways of executing that role? And is your hypothesis that this is how you need to do it, is it true or not? Because I find it a big shame if people say, well, I'm not like that person, so I can't do that, because then we never get a cultural change in how are we working on the work floor. But yeah, I see that a lot, unfortunately. And I would like to tell CISOs, question your own hypothesis on what the role of a CISO should be and how a CISO should act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are, to the younger generation, so what are, to your opinion, let's say the 3 main things that they can take with them in order to become successful in such a role, if they want to?
Yeah.
What are the 3 things?
Okay, first of all, the one that I just mentioned, question your own beliefs on what a CISO should be. Write down maybe first, what is for you the traits of a good CISO? What are the traits? And then question them. Second, of course you need to work in an organization, you need to manage your emotions, but still listen to them. They are information. They're giving you information. And 3, keep taking time to reflect on what you're experiencing on the work floor and how you respond to that. And keep time to reflect, because as a CISO, you have a tough job, because you're not always the most popular guy in the room. Or girl. And you need support in dealing with that unpleasant situation, because very few people like to be the unpopular person in the room.
Yeah.
So yeah, those would be my top of mind.
Yeah, nice. Well, we can take that along. Super. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Marloes.
Thank you, Yuri. Yeah, it was nice to be here.